What's going on, everybody? It's Frito here for your Overwatch. With enough game time in the 1-3-2 role queue with all the crazy tank reworks, I wanted to review the ramifications of those format changes. Some parts of it I loved, others not so much. Now, based on what Jeff Kaplan said on the forums the other day, he as well has perceived a mostly negative response to the experiment, so it's unlikely it's going to be coming, but I think it's still useful to evaluate what we've learned from going through this. Some of the things I found out kind of surprised me. That's where I want to start. I think a lot of people assumed playing tank would be worse with one, but I can't say I agree. I would actually say it's less rewarding, but it's far easier. So since the way they tweaked the numbers on all the tanks, you're not quite 2 tanks worth of value in one player, but maybe like 1.5. As a tank player, you are super powered in this mode. It is way easier to play tank in this format because across the board, everybody's just got more stats. And the enemy's got limited tanking, so where you pressure can have a bigger impact than before, because just as like a quick example, if you're in a Zarya Rhine mirror in 2-2-2, and maybe you push past the Rhine, well, the Zarya still has a bubble to block your shatter, right? Whereas there's so many cases in single tank where either the enemy tank simply doesn't have the ability to interact with the thing you do, or it's easy to bypass them because there's only one of them. And the big benefit of this is that tanking is just far more forgiving. Whereas in a 2-2-2 system, it's very important that you coordinate with your off tank and really your whole team. Otherwise, you just easily get blown up. But when you have more stats, you have more weight to throw around, you're far more of a bullet sponge. And in this way, the team fights, when the tank was involved, felt more to me like Heroes of the Storm. If you've played that game, the team fights are really long. There's a lot of abilities exchanging back and forth. And since both tanks are quite powerful, just with stats, it did feel like that raid boss mode that we thought it might play like. In a really odd way, I felt that it made for really lopsided gameplay, which is exactly what I guess you'd expect when there's 1-3-2, but not lopsided in the way that the tanks are just these paper thin characters that have to hide all the time. In the other way, where whenever they're involved in a fight, it felt like those MOBA elements were harder to surmount than even in the 2-2-2 format. But there is the other end of the spectrum as well, where if your DPS are losing either the range pickoff battle or dealing with a flanker, for example, I would say characters like Hanzo, Widowmaker, Tracer that can play off angles or flank or get behind you or just take 1v1s and win them, those squishy matchups definitely have the potential to full out carry the game. And I think based on a lot of feedback that I've got about this mode from you all is that games seem very boom or bust. Because if you don't have 2 tanks to create the space so everyone can safely get out of spawn, well, that enemy Hanzo might just be picking you off constantly. And you as the solo tank can go to try to chase him, but then maybe there's a Tracer in your backline that does the same thing, right? So that's the weird thing to me. In some engagements, I felt the MOBA aspect was obnoxious and stronger than I expected it. And then, of course, there is just more damage on the field. So if for whatever reason there's a mismatch there, it can very quickly be out of your hands, which is what people asked for when they said they want DPS to be able to carry. This is the yin and yang of it, right? In 2-2-2 and in previous formats, DPS are fun and have pop-off moments, but the vast majority of winning in the game is from your tank and supports. Whereas, well, when you add 3 DPS in, there's far more DPS battles going on. You have the ability to find pickoffs because there's just so much space with only 1 tank on the field that somebody's going to find the ability to do damage. But when you have that, then you have stomp games back and forth, which I don't think is what anybody really expects of Overwatch, despite if most people play DPS and it helps queue times and all that. From that front, of course, Jeff Kaplan did say that queue times were amazing on the forums. Finally, everybody can get in and play some DPS, but when we consider all the points I've already made, it seems kind of like the sole positive in all of this, yet gameplay takes a huge hit, especially in the way we approach the game. And that might play a huge component in all of this. Players very clearly, to me, didn't know how to set up or play Overwatch in this way, which is the troubling part about only doing this for a few days. The standard way players play Overwatch is grouping up with a death ball. No matter where that death ball is, no matter if there's high ground or not, no matter where the objective is or where it has to go and the angles the enemy has, everybody wants the death ball all the time, even when you don't have a Rhine. And that's really, really bad. But I think if we got enough time, we would start to break down the maps in terms of angles and flanks and that kind of space. But that's not what anybody's used to. They're used to just walking to cart and having all the tools around them to protect them. And when Overwatch doesn't play that way, I think people get really frustrated. But also, I would say say that it doesn't feel like the maps were ever designed to play this way. You can't tell me that a map like Paris was designed so that one tank could get you through the most obnoxious choke in the world. No way. I think supports get the rawest deal in this entire setup because many support players really are used to having those two tanks in front of them to heal and help protect them and peel for them. When you only have one tank, you have to play support kind of like a DPS, which I don't think is what a lot of support players have ever asked for. You have to somehow balance getting into position to do something, but somehow fending off the flankers and sniper lines of sight. So all of a sudden you're just playing a full-on shooter game where you can kind of heal your team, but you have to just mechanically duel things. It's something that in 222 will carry games in the few instances that you have to do it, but in this kind of mode the percentage of gameplay it takes up is like most of it. Whereas before you had the security of regrouping with your team and just playing inside the team comp, now there kind of isn't a team comp. So overall, an interesting experiment for sure, but one that I think sacrifices some great aspects that makes Overwatch approachable to instead just appease the player numbers that want to play the most popular role, the one that doesn't do much in the game. It's a tricky problem and one that I don't know how Blizzard's going to solve, and I'd much rather see systems put into place for role queue that incentivize you to play off roles. Why isn't there anything like that? As far as I know, in other games, sometimes the queue will force you to play off role if the queue times are too high at a impacted role. I think we need to focus more on doing those types of things because right now, just allowing anyone to pick what they want at any time means that even I can queue up for DPS, wait my turn in line, go do my dishes, chores around the house, and just wait for the queue to pop and get my chance, and there's no mitigating factor to curate that queue. The only incentive to selecting multiple roles is faster queue times, but you are guaranteed to not play damage. So the only way you can do it is to join that line. I talked about this before, but we used to have a culture where we put peer pressure on each other to try to make a better team comp. So a lot of people had to fill, and that was one of the things that we wanted to get away from in 222 with role queue. But there was a stabilizing force to it where we could have better queue times and sometimes decent team comps, most of the time not, of course. But now that we don't even have the option to do that, there's no method to try to get a DPS player who maybe could play Zarya, but won't sign up for it, but could be convinced to fill on it sometimes, even if it's at a separate rank, which you would think could solve all of this. All the different roles are different ranks anyway. I don't know, it's a tough problem. Can they actually convert that player to fill? Or perhaps Blizzard just sees that as a solution that would be just a drop in the bucket in terms of queue times. Maybe just there's an overwhelming amount of DPS players that only will play DPS. And if that's the case, I don't know how to solve this problem because Overwatch isn't really about DPS. So Blizzard can either go the route to change what Overwatch is, or they can try to make the rest of the game more appealing. I mean, in their blog post that they made, they're talking about the experimental card in terms of trying to offer up more vanilla ice cream if that's what more people like. But is Overwatch like ice cream, or is it more like a band? And in a band, you need guitar, bass, drums, a singer. You don't have three singers all trying to be the front man just because it's the most coveted position. No, you gotta have a balance, right? Otherwise, the music doesn't really work out. I guess you could take turns like the Beatles or something, but you get my point. There's a balance there in order for the Overwatch gameplay to harmonize in the way that we all enjoy. But it's definitely a problem, one that I think a hero like Sigma was looking to solve for Blizzard, where they try to make this character that is more about skill shots to pull some attention towards that category, and it didn't really work. And now they tried this other solution that I don't think really works either. I don't know what they're gonna do. They want more players to play Overwatch, it seems, but the vast majority of average players don't interact with the game in the way that hardcore players that enjoy the fundamentals and the balanced gameplay and the ones that like role queue and 222. So in some ways, Blizzard might be looking at 222 as a bit of a failure because it hasn't revitalized the game in the way that they may have hoped it did. I'm not so sure how I feel about it because as someone who plays the game a lot, I would say it was absolutely necessary and provided only good things. But to a casual player that doesn't want to learn the game and play Overwatch like it's a pew-pew shooter game rather than a team-based MOBA FPS hybrid, well, they're not interested in engaging in that aspect of the game. So what are they going to do? I really don't know. Well, guys, it's going to be it for me for today. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to leave it a like. It really does help us out and let us know that you're enjoying the content. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and hit the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos go live. Link to the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out news, updates, and dank memes. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. We'll see you guys next time.